Some people are going through health situations where the expectations of what you're hoping for in your 50s or 60s or 70s isn't turning out like you thought it would. Think back just a decade ago when the stock market just dropped. There were people that absolutely had planned what a retirement was going to look like, and in a matter of days, weeks, and months, their living the good life retirement turned into how are we going to make it till the day we die and still have money in the bank? And their expectations of what retirement was going to look like was turned 180 degrees. You start thinking through your life, and maybe you can relate to expectations you had, and life didn't quite meet them. Hope deferred does what? Makes the heart sick. I know the second verse talks about when it's realized how there is joy, but let me give you some hard truths to start off with. The first one is this. It's not in your notes, but life in the Bible will teach you this, is sometimes your expectations for this life will not be realized in this life. You may have cancer, and your getting better is you go home to be with Jesus. You may be parenting a child who is far from God, and in your lifetime, you never see him come back to God. The reality is, in this life, some of our expectations will not be realized. And so our longing and our hope is not in our expectations being met in this life, but it really is changing our expectations to rest solely upon the goodness and the sovereignty of God. Let me read for you a verse in the book of Psalms that is just amazing. Psalm 62 verse 5 says this, "My soul, wait silently for God alone." The psalmist is saying to himself, soul, wait. And wait silently for God alone. Don't wait for your spouse to get better and more awesome to meet all of your needs. Don't wait for your kids to finally say, yes, mom, yes, dad, and do everything you ask them to do and come home to a spotless house and your kids are awesome because you are more awesome. Don't wait until your cancer goes away. Don't wait until your bank account is flush with cash. But he says, wait silently for God alone. For my expectation is from him. I want you to let that verse, if you will, kind of settle into your soul right now. Because what the psalmist is calling us to is to a completely different expectation. Is it wrong to want a marriage that is fruitful and growing and has harmony? It's not wrong at all. Is it wrong to want to have peace in your family? No, not at all. God desires for there to be peace in the family. Is it wrong for you to want to have good health? The answer is no, it's not wrong. Is it wrong for you to want to have finances to care for your physical needs? Not wrong at all. Proverbs talks about it. Solomon says, don't give me so many riches that I don't depend on you, but don't give me so little that I curse you. He says, give me enough. What is wrong is when our expectation is placed solely in something other than God. If God chooses to take your health, we glorify God. If God chooses to wipe out your 401k, the glory goes to God. If God chooses to keep you single, the glory goes to God. If God chooses to take your spouse home, the glory goes to God, because our expectation is in the person of God. My soul. It's like he's telling his soul, soul, listen up. My soul, wait silently for God alone. For all you type A's like myself out there, this verse goes against every fiber of our being, because waiting is not part of what we do. If there's a problem, Like Vanilla Ice would say, yo, I'll solve it. No, sorry. If there's a problem, what do? We make a plan to fix that problem. If we got an obstacle, we'll try to find a way around it to work through it. But what does he say? When your expectations aren't realized, wait silently on God. I want to look at 3 dangers in life that can lead us to unrealized expectations and then end where we started in Psalm 62. So if you have your Bibles, what I want to do is I want to tell you the story of Abraham, and I want to fit this into what God says about expectations. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 12, where we're going to start. And as you go there, I want to remind you of a verse in the book of Hebrews. In the book of Hebrews chapter 11, verses 39 through 40, we have the conclusion of the Hall of Faith. Talks about men like Abraham, talks about men like Joshua, talks about men throughout the Bible who served God in faith. And at the end of Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, it ends with these 2 verses as this. And all these, talking about these men and women of faith, having obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. If you look back in the Old Testament specifically, you'll find so many people were promised things that in their lifetime were not realized. Abraham was promised land, seed, and blessing in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. When he died, all that he owned was a gravesite for his wife. He had one son that was of promise, Isaac. He didn't have a nation. It's not until Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob then has 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of Israel. It's not until his great-grandsons, great-great-grandsons, that a nation starts developing. And it's 400 years after that that they become a nation in the land of Egypt. So when the Israelites become a nation, it is 500 years approximately from the time that Abraham was promised a nation, and it's not even in the land they were promised. They were in captivity in Egypt. I share that with you because if Abraham's expectations were placed in the realization of the promises in his lifetime, he would have died depressed. So what I want to do is look at Abraham's life. Genesis 12, 1 through 3, he's promised land, seed, blessing. Genesis 13, life is looking pretty good for Abraham. Here's what it says about him. Genesis chapter 13, and we'll look at verses 11 through 14. Verse 11, then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And then it goes on, and the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes now, and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, westward. For all the land which you see I give to you, and for your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth tree of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. In chapter 13, verse 1 and 2, it says this, Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. It says this, Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. I want to talk to you just briefly about the danger, if you will, of clear sailing. If you look at Abraham's trajectory at this point in his life, he's promised he leaves the Ur of Chaldees in Genesis chapter 11, that God will give him land, seed, and blessing in chapter 12. Chapter 13, his livestock is increasing so much so that he and Lot can't live in the same place. So Lot chooses some land. Abram goes to another piece of land so they can continue to grow in their wealth. God meets with Abram and says, look north, south, east, west. everything you see, it's yours. If you were to take a snapshot of Abraham's life right here, he's got the proverbial cat by the tail. He's like, I got this. Look at this. My livestock are increasing. My land, God says it's all mine. Certainly the kids are going to be coming soon because God promised this as well. And things were going well. I would suggest to you that when things are going well, sometimes that's, if you will, a delayed problem. Let me share why. Let me give you a personal illustration. When we first got here to the church, the first about 2 or 3 years, the church went from about 60 to about 110, 120, like that. It was quick. And I remember thinking, like, this is easy. This is awesome. You preach, you do some things, people come, people get saved, and it just grows. And so I just, so we should be at about 600 by now at that trajectory. This is going to go great. And you know what I found happened? Is number one, I'm not as awesome as I thought I was, and the church growth had very little to do with me. And you know what? Sometimes life happens, and it doesn't go how you plan. And when things are going well, you get an inflated view of yourself. And when things start going not as planned, what begins to happen? You start to question God's goodness. You might start to question God's calling. Maybe your marriage started off awesome, and now it's a little bit rocky. So you might be thinking, maybe I should just bail on this thing. It started off good, it's not so good now, so maybe I need to go on to another relationship. Maybe that will fix the problem. Maybe your kids aren't so great, so you're just like counting down the day until they turn 18. Like, I can't wait. They hit 18, they're out of the house, they're no longer my problem. It's been my experience, I believe the experience of others, that sometimes the danger of clear sailing is this, is you expect life to always kind of go like this. And when life doesn't go as planned, you start questioning things like God's goodness, God's plan, and your place in it. I got a sign up there. It's a speed limit sign, and it has the infinity symbol. How many of you guys like going fast on vacation? I love going fast. I mean, whatever the speed limit says, that fast. If I ever came across a speed limit infinity, I would be in road heaven right there. Like, just put the pedal to the metal, and let's see how fast this baby can go. And anyone been on trips where it's maybe 1,000 miles or some big number, and you start doing the math after you're an hour or two into it? I do that all the time. I'm always calculating, I can go faster than Google Maps or my navigation system, and I'll start doing the math. What am I averaging between stops? And so I'll keep track of mileage, time on the road, and I'm always doing the calculations to the point where if we're supposed to be going 70 and we're going 60, I'm starting to take off the time as we go. My mind's always thinking like this. We're going down the road. You know what happens? You get 2 or 3 hours in, and I've got my projected time that we're going to get there, which means, kids, you can't go to the bathroom unless it's to fill up a tank. But you know what almost always ends up happening? Atlanta ends up happening, Dallas ends up happening, and other unexpected road construction ends up happening. And all of a sudden, my 12-hour trip starts becoming a 12-and-a-half-hour trip. My kids get hungry. Oh, got to add another 45 minutes there. And all of a sudden, my expectation of going infinity down the road turns into a much smaller number, and it really bothers me. And I would say the danger of clear sailing is the same danger I have when I'm driving, is I expect, because I'm in a clear patch right now, the rest of it's going to be clear all the way forward. And so when I hit those rough patches, I don't always handle them real well. You can talk to my kids about bathroom breaks. If they didn't go to the bathroom at the last stop, we're not stopping for a while. And it's probably not necessarily good parenting necessarily, but I have an expectation, and they are held captive by that expectation. My wife's the only one who gets a free pass, and even that one's barely a free pass. And of course myself, I'm exempted from the bathroom rules because I'm the driver. Clear sailing is like that, isn't it? It has a way of, how do I put this, numbing you to the real problems that may be ahead. Well, life gets real for Abraham just a couple chapters later. Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 through 6 says this. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, Do not be afraid, Abram. I'm your shield, your exceedingly great reward. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Abraham's seeing the land coming into view. He's seeing the richest blessings coming to view. But what about this nation thing, God? It doesn't seem like you're doing what you said you were going to do. Then Abram said, look, you've given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, look now toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted to him for righteousness. As we move on into the next chapter, what we're going to find is that although God shows up and tells Abram, I have a son planned for you, it's not Eliezer. As time progresses, Abram becomes increasingly, and so does Sarah, increasingly impatient at the timing of God, and they will eventually take things into their own hands. What I want to talk about here just briefly is the danger of instant gratification. Abram dealt with it, but it's because after years of not seeing the promise fulfilled, he's going to go and take things into his own hand. But let's bring this into where we live right now. We live in a world of instant gratification, don't we? It's been proven that your phone, it's over there. Let's try to look for it. Your phone, when you go to get like your Facebook notifications, your emails, your text messages, it's almost like a drug. You become addicted to that new content that's coming on there, that new message from someone, that new whatever, and you find yourself going for your phone, right? Looking for what's next, what's going on. Has someone played on Words with Friends? Have you gotten a new email, a new instant or text message, a new Facebook post? Maybe someone's posted something new about their family on Facebook. Maybe it's your Twitter account. I think President Trump may have some issues with that, with posting all the time. The reality is we are wired today to want to have our needs met right now. This idea of what my dad used to call delayed gratification is something we struggle with. And we're going to find Abraham struggles with it. He actually goes to God here at the beginning of Genesis 15 and says, what about this son that you promised me? Is it going to be Eliezer? He's not even my kid, but he's in my house. Is he going to get all this inheritance? Is he going to receive the promises? God, what are you doing? Because our timing and God's timing are oftentimes very different. And we are wired like Abraham to want to have our needs gratified now. Our expectations are sometimes unrealized because we want them right now. And we become impatient. Christmas is coming, like I said earlier. How would it go in your house if your kids finally said, I'm done with the waiting, I'm just going to open them up? How would that go in your house? Not very good, right? Very badly. Does God give good gifts? Is God allowed to set the timetable for when you get to open those good gifts? Yeah. But what do we find ourselves doing? We find ourselves doing what Abraham is about to do in Genesis 16, is we're tired of waiting. We want to be gratified now, and so we find a different way, if you will, to open up that gift early. And that's what happens in Genesis 16. Genesis 16 says, now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarah said to Abram, see now the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abram heeded the voice of Sarah. Then Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. After Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. I want you to catch that time frame. How long had Abram been waiting for God to fulfill his end of the bargain? 10 years. 10 years ago, I was 30. 10 years ago, you were what age? Think of waiting on something for 10 years like a child. And mind you as well, that children have, if you will, this short window of time where you can have children. If you're a lady, they talk about your biological clock ticking, right? When you hit certain ages, like if we're going to have another kid, it better happen soon. And every year that goes by, it's not just another year that goes by, but the window of opportunity keeps closing. For Abram and Sarah, that window was closed. It was done. And so what does Abram do? What does Sarah do? They take matters into their own hands. One of the dangers of unrealized expectations is when we feel like God or life isn't living up to what we had expected, and we get tired of waiting, we take things into our own hands. And that's exactly what Abraham does. Abram goes into his handmaid, has a child, his name is Ishmael, and to this day, the Muslim people track their heritage back to Abraham through Ishmael. To this day, the troubles in the Middle East go back to a time when Abraham decided to take things into his own hands. We do that too, don't we? Our marriage isn't going well, so people will look for answers to their marriage problems outside of their marriage, outside of God. You're having troubles in your parenting, so you're counting down the day until they turn 18. Things aren't going well at work, so you get mad and you leave in a fuss. Or worse yet, you become a problem in your workplace. Unrealized expectations will sometimes move us to take things into our own hand. I believe one of the reasons that you hear about midlife crisis is because people don't know how to handle their expectations of where they'd be in life and the reality of life. Which drives us right back to Psalms, doesn't it? My soul, wait silently on the Lord, for my expectations come from you. Genesis 21, we skip forward about 13 years. Abram takes things in his own hands, has a child. The child Ishmael now grows up. He's 13 years of age. So the promise that was delayed 10 years now gets delayed another 13 years. You get to Genesis 21, and here's what happens. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived, bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Verse 5, now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Trusting God is not easy. Living out Psalm 62:5, O my soul, wait on the Lord, for he alone is my expectation. That is a hard place to live, isn't it? The question is this, is it worth it? In a very real way, was it worth it for Abraham to wait on the Lord? Yeah. At 100 years old, he got to celebrate the birth of his son. And his son would have twins. And one of those twins would have 12 children, 12 boys. And those 12 boys would become a nation, the Jewish nation that we know today. And God would absolutely fulfill his promises. And what I want to speak to you and to me today is this. In this life, our expectations will not be met. Your kids will not be as awesome as you think they should be. You are not as awesome as you think you are. Your marriage is going to have some hiccups and some struggles. Your church is not going to be perfect. Your workplace is going to be filled with hardship and difficulties. Your 401k is probably going to have some problems. Your fill in the blank is not going to live up to your expectations. So what will you do? I want you to preach to your own soul what the psalmist preached to his. My soul, wait silently on the Lord, for he alone is my expectation. What do you do when life doesn't turn out how you expected it to? You look to God and his sovereignty, believe and know that he is enough. He doesn't promise to turn everything around in this life. He does promise us a home with him. He doesn't promise to make all the hardships of this life go away. He promises to be with us through them. He doesn't promise that your wife or your husband is going to be the perfect spouse, but he does promise this, that you can please God by loving and honoring your spouse the way God tells you to. And when you die and go to heaven, he will say, well done, good and faithful servant. This life is full of broken expectations, but the next one is not. Where God is calling us to is better than what this world has. My soul waits silently for God alone, for my expectation is from him. God, you're good. We thank you that we can trust you with our expectations that are not